Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight for Ed Fornieles' virtual studio visit at the AA. I'm Jessica Reynolds from Experimental 13, which I teach with Lily Jenks and Judy El-Hajjar, and I'm delighted to be introducing Ed in just a moment. First to say this is our final studio visit in this series, Performing Identity, which has been organised with StudioVisit and our AA unit that researches the idea of unbuilding the museum. Over the talks, we've been exploring how performing identity is not only about the plasticity of the self and the other, but about challenging dominant narratives and stereotypes, mining underrepresented histories, and harnessing and redeploying new technologies. Previously, we've met with Harold O'Fay from his room in Cambridge, where he discussed histories of colonialism, blackness, and Croydon as a city in drag. London-based Tai Shani, who discussed feminine subjectivity in her immersive works that privilege sensation, experience, and interiority. And Adsmin Alutti from her Buenos Aires sausage house, where she presented her colourful, humorous geometric paintings as subjects themselves and discussed the political space of queer theory. So it's wonderful to introduce our final speaker tonight, Ed Fornieles. Ed's work examines the habits, rules, power structures, social processes, and protocols of 21st century culture, including the internet, social media, digital economies, and sitcom architecture, through which we come to define ourselves and within which our identities are made up and made real. And his work consists of installation, sculpture, performance, and video. He lives and works in London. He has exhibited in a wide range of international institutions, including the New Museum in New York, Palais de Tokyo, Paris, Schirn Kunsthalle, Frankfurt, Chisenhale Gallery, Serpentine Gallery, and Carlos Ishikawa in London, amongst many others. And he gained his MA in sculpture at the Royal College of Art and his BA at the Ruskin at Oxford. And the name of the talk is Cell. So the talk will last around 45 minutes or so, and then we'll have some time for questions. Though if you do have questions during the talk, do feel free to raise your hand as well, or write your question in the chat. So we'd love it if you could keep your videos on so we feel more connected, but that's up to you. So yeah, thank you so much, everyone, and over to you, Ed.
Cool, thanks very much for that intro. It's good to be here. So I'm going to be mainly talking about a project called Cell, which is the most recent, I suppose, thing that I've released, which is an immersive role-play performance that sort of looks at the culture of the alt-right and masculinity, I suppose how it performs itself within that culture, but also more broadly. I'm going to try and show you some videos from that, and hopefully the internet will cope with it. And maybe that's a good place to start. So I'm just going to show you a small extract from this work. I won't say too much before, other than we were a group of 10 people who performed this radicalized right-wing group on a sort of path of self-betterment. And there are two stages to the works. The first is this is defined by the rule, you should always have someone lower than yourself. And we created a bunch of mechanics that allowed that to be performed. And the second stage was trying to create something, an alternative way of behaving, an alternative way of inhabiting the space through role play. But I'll go into that in more detail later. What you're about to watch is a moment where one of the characters, David, is, I suppose he's confronting his relationship with his father. And he's in this group that's trying to bolster his ego and bolster his sense of self so he can sort of push back against things and push back essentially against this father figure. But I'll play it and then we can talk a bit more about what's actually going on under the bonnet. So fingers crossed that this works.
There's no time to feel sorry for him.
I'm not feeling sorry.
David Noam. David is the youngest member of Cell. When further research was conducted, it revealed an extremely difficult relationship with his parents. In his diary entries, David describes his father as a hard and, at times, violent disciplinarian who physically and mentally abused him. David's father would make constant reference to the idea that David was effeminate or lacking in some essential male qualities, an attack that David took very much to heart.
It isn't my fault.
Why is it not your fault? Can't you take responsibility? I mean, it's ours as well, obviously. Maybe you got too much of your mother in you. Can't you feel that you're a disappointment?
I'm not like you.
You are like...
I'm like you. I just...
You're not like me. You might have my genetics, but you're nothing like me. You understand? I don't want to see you anymore. As well.
Fuck you.
I don't need you.
I don't need you. Fuck off.
What are you going to do about it then? I have my own life.
Fuck off.
What are you going to do about it then?
Fuck off. Yeah, I've had my own life. Fucking fuck off.
What are you going to do about it then?
Fuck off.
Fuck off.
Fuck off. Fuck off.
Fuck off.
Fuck off. Fuck
What are you going to do
off.
about it?
Fuck off. Fuck off. I have my own life. I can fucking take care of myself. Fuck off.
We see David gaining the strength he had previously lacked. Empowered by the cell group, he pushes back at his father, stating that he does in fact not require his father's affirmation, and indeed does possess the masculine qualities he had previously been accused of lacking.
I'm not my mom.
During the cell, downtime was key.
Okay, can you guys hear me? Okay. I might also, how was the video as a watching experience? Okay, I'm going to just also play the beginning bit, which will give you perhaps a bit more context as well.
Find somewhere comfortable, laying or sitting. Please close your eyes. You are about to enter cell. Feel the weight of your entire body leaning into how comfortable it feels. Notice how you are feeling right now, acknowledging any thoughts and emotions, knowing that whatever they might be, it is okay. Letting go of that responsibility to be who you normally are. Imagine the character in front of you. Greet them in whatever way they want to be greeted. Let them come closer. As you make eye contact, allow them to walk into you and become part of you. It has been a long journey to get to this point. In the other room, Sam, Troy, and Chad are there, ready to welcome you into cell and perform the final initiation rite to cement you as a member of the group. When the music begins, it is time to open your eyes and find yourself in Sam's apartment, ready to begin the work that needs to be done.
What are you willing to do? Tonight! Because you fucking will! If you don't fucking say it again so that I can fucking hear you, what are you willing to do? Today! In 72 hours, we're going to be departing on our final mission.
Welcome to the cell.
All right? Some of you are going to come with us. Those who are strong, those who want to be men, those who are not anonymous. And some of you are going to go back to your fucking mother, suck off her fussy fucking cock while she complains on Reddit about your boyfriend who doesn't fuck her up the arse anymore. That's going to be your life again, because it's now time to make changes. Let's fucking imprint. Let's make something fucking happen.
Yeah!
Yeah! Yeah! Yeah! Yeah! So, for these next 2 days, you're going to be under supervision. constant supervision. Work out who to trust and not to trust. Work out if you can make it here. I release you to the flat. What's mine is yours. Enjoy. Be strong. Explore.
Welcome to the cell.
Welcome to the cell.
As you can see, the rooms were rigged with 8 standard home security cameras, as well as each member being equipped with a body harness and body cam. Sam states this has been done to communicate their message beyond the walls of his apartment. Although designed for these purposes, the footage also gives us a unique insight into this group. Through this footage, perhaps we can begin to understand what it was that sustained and propelled these men towards such a violent and brutal end.
Everybody get on the fucking ground right now! Right now, get on the fucking ground! You come here! Get up! Come here! Come with me!
The hierarchy. It looks like the group organized themselves into a hierarchical pyramidic structure with broadly 3 tiers. Tier 1, Sam, a charismatic...
Okay, so that is an extract from Cell. The whole video that is part of is about 40 minutes long, and there's another video which I'll show you a little bit of later, which is a debrief, which documents people's accounts of their experiences within the role-play environment. Okay, so the context of this work is a hypothetical alt-right group, which sort of harks from gamer culture, 4chan. It's mimicking or egging certain things that do exist or have existed. Groups of men from those online environments who have met up online, who've embarked on a self-betterment program, normally train themselves to violent ends. Normally in America, also in Canada. But it is also hypothetical. So the space is not a literal one. It's this liminal zone, often symbolic, which is present, I suppose, within like the materiality of the space, as well as the protocol and rules that were set to create the environment. Yeah, it's role play. So the mechanics that were developed to inhabit the space come a lot from, were workshopped with this woman called Nina Ruden Essendrop, who's actually the David character that you saw. LARP is live action role play, and it's a culture that I suppose has existed for about 30 or 40 years now, primarily from the Nordic countries. And so there's a lot of mechanics in what we did, which come from that culture. And a lot of the safety devices also come from there. So that was very important. I should also say that the roleplay lasted 3 days, over which time we were constantly in character. You never come out apart from these debrief sessions at the beginning of the day and at the end of the experience. And I suppose that's quite an important aspect as you move from immersion to reflection. So it was a structured sandbox, meaning that anything could happen. So all the stuff there through improvisation and just inhabiting the character. But there were a few things that had to happen. So I mentioned before that the work was in 2 stages, and to transition from stage 1 to stage 2 is this murder-suicide that happens midway. And after that point, it's not clear as to whether or not the characters exist or not, whether or not they've died, but something is definitely fundamentally shifted. And so that was the only hard sort of milestone that we had to sort of pass. Participants, and those people they came from a variety of different places. Some of them were from the art world, some of them from LARP, some of them were from gamer forums, some of them were actors, and one of them, maybe most interestingly, the top of the hierarchy, this guy Sam, who was giving the speech at the beginning, he's a confidence trainer. So he teaches men how to inhabit a room and to, I don't know, dominate. I said immersive over 3 days, and it's within this environment. And the environment, there were two spaces. There was one which was where we slept and where we did fighting, and the other one which was a more relaxed space where you could chill, and it was sort of peppered with the iconography of this culture. Why? That is a very important and oddly interesting question. Why in the hell do this? I think for me, I was in conversation with a bunch of friends who look at this stuff, some of them professionally, 4chan and right-wing culture, monitoring it and looking at how radicalization is working online. And around 2015, 2016, you see like a spike in numbers, and you see also like, I don't know, the movement generally getting more traction. And you get this gelling of things. You get gamer culture mixing with this kind of question mark about identity and about male identity specifically, and about self-betterment. So you get like, I don't know, /fit, which is a forum about becoming stronger, more manly. This image of a traditional masculine identity becomes much more and more popular. And there are certain mouthpieces to this ideology that also start getting traction. So it's very easy to dismiss these kinds of people, and it's very easy as well to kind of judge them and push them away. And I really don't think that's a helpful response to changing the situation or dealing with it in any structural way. So I think behind this work is this idea of critical empathy. But we can maybe go into that more later. And it is very difficult. You know, these people are espousing the most racist, most misogynistic kind of rhetoric you could possibly imagine. But then it's also interesting to ask, why are they attracted to that? And what, you know, how are they using that ideology as a tool in their own lives? Which I suppose joins to the next point, this idea of self-betterment. There is, even though we think of these cultures as incredibly negative, as we might even think of like jihadism as incredibly negative, it often promotes itself as a vehicle for self-betterment. Like it's a positive thing. And so like, even though during the immersive role play, it's hard to exist in the first stage. In fact, it's brutal. Like I was waterboarded and had my head shaved and was beaten to the point where like I couldn't really function properly. Like I really took a lot out of me. I also felt the positive experiences from being part of a group, from feeling connected to others, feeling like a place within a system. So it's important for me as well that instead of critiquing something from an externality, from outside, and sort of saying that it's somehow wrong, it was important to somehow do it from the inside, and to sort of feel it as opposed to just sort of conceptually understand it. And then maybe the most important why would be to try to figure out an alternative way of behaving. How do you transition from this very intense, aggressive mode to something that is more forgiving or just different? Okay, yeah, so there are these themes. Again, like talking about toxic masculinity, what is that? Where does it come from? How does that culture function and promote itself? And then more broadly is that I was talking about 4chan and gaming culture, but specifically like patriarchal culture, I think is much broader. So even though I'm looking at the alt-right, I like to think that also trying to speak about a generalized experience, both of masculinity and more structural experience, whereby it's defined by will to dominate things. And I think that's something that perhaps we can all address, or perhaps maybe all relate to. And then, yeah, developing alternative strategies to inhabiting the world. What does a post-patriarchal reality even look like? What are alternative modes of masculinity? Is masculinity even a vehicle that we should try to salvage or save, or is it something we should try to reject? And I think there's somehow maybe these questions within the work. 4chan. Now, yeah, I don't know. We're all going to make it. There's a lot of lure. There's a lot of imagery and culture. And there's a deep, very old. It's weird. It's like, so 4chan is an online forum that used to be where you can anonymously post things. And it used to be a place where it primarily used to be a left-wing place, but also primarily a place where you'd go for making online, for the lols, for having, I don't know, like-minded people who were into abhorrent culture and jokes. And then it became political around the anonymous movement. And then it transitioned from being a leftist movement or anarchist movement to primarily a right-wing space. So it was interesting to think about that and to chart that. And again, to ask the question, why exactly? There are two competing ideologies perhaps going on here. Like a lot of the things that I've been looking at come from feminism and bell hooks specifically. This book, The Will to Change, is really quite powerful, and it talks about masculinity and about what underpins it, why it promotes certain kinds of behavior, and tries to advocate for like a space for vulnerability, or offering a space of vulnerability, and to try to also highlight the fact that it's not serving the people that embody it. It's not serving the people who internalize that kind of mode of behavior. And then versus Jordan Peterson. So Jordan Peterson is somebody who's advocating a much more traditional mode of masculinity and has become very popular within the right wing, as well as just more generally within popular culture. Anyway, I don't like him. I think he has some things which are interesting to say, which is to take responsibility for yourself. I think that's a good thing that you can sort of advocate for. But there are aspects to his ideology which encourage repression. And also, again, this traditional mode of being, which I think is damaging. Okay, Poe's law is a law that anything posted on the internet is in some way ironic. So you can never trust anything that anyone says, because it might have a smiley face after it. There might be this kind of, you can never fully trust it. And the environment that I suppose is being spoken about is a highly ironic one. And I think that has a massive effect on the psyche, on the individual. And it's something to be made aware of. It's also interesting to think in terms of this work, which is hyper sincere. Like there's no irony in the presentation of it. So that's, I don't know, just perhaps an interesting thing. I don't know why I put this slide in exactly, other to say that like these groups are very good at creating a culture which then gets digested and dispersed by other groups. They are genius at it. And often you'll see memes on Facebook or Instagram that have their root within 4chan. And maybe this is just something to think about in terms of this concept bleed, which I will go into in a little bit later. But it's about bleeding out or spreading a message in some way. Okay, so again, talking about the structure of the piece, there are two parts, as I mentioned before. One was about recreating a hierarchical system, one that sort of embodies this toxic mode of masculinity, but primarily this, let's see the next stage. Yeah, you must always have someone lower than yourself. This was like the foundational protocol. Like, so there were 3 tiers within the structure. There was the leader, there were 2 enforcers, and then there were the subjects. There were the people below them. And I, as the organizer, felt that it was important that I was on the bottom. But when you're on the bottom, you're constantly struggling with people to just prove yourself. And the entire group can turn against one person very quickly if they think that it will keep them above the person that's being attacked. It's very hard to trust people, although you need to also form some alliances, otherwise you won't be able to survive. It was quite brutal in that respect. And then the second stage, as I mentioned, is after the death stage, where we tried to find out or feel out an alternative way of being. We said, okay, the hierarchical structure no longer exists. It just does not exist. But the thing is, obviously, that's fine to say that, but how does your behavior change? How do you feel? So during that stage, we used a lot of Gestalt Therapy. We took a lot of things from this film called The Work, which is a film that documents male, I suppose, groups that go into prisons and try to create a space where men can be vulnerable and work through things in their lives. So for instance, one thing they have is this thing called a rage tunnel, whereby a corridor of people is formed. One person's on one end and one person's on the other. Let's say this one person on one end wants to confront something in their relationship with their father. The one on the other end plays the role of the father. And if there's aggression or tension, that person will try to move their way through the corridor of people who are restraining him and physically getting his energy out of his body. It's a really intense thing to do. And so the second stage has a lot of these mechanics in that allows people to do this sort of thing when it felt appropriate. Again, I mentioned this before. One thing that I'm interested in within sculpture, within performance, and perhaps even with architecture would be this movement between immersion and reflection. To like fully be present and to inhabit an identity, to answer and respond and just be that thing to the best of your abilities. To not be thinking, should I do this? Would I do this in this situation? But to just simply do. And obviously it takes a lot of work to get to that point, but once you're in it, it's a very powerful place to be. And then moving into a mode of reflection, in this instance, we use these debriefings. It allows you to question that behavior, like, why was I behaving that way? What did it feel like to behave that way? Communicating to other people how you might have made me feel during this instance, and just trying to make sense of your experiences. So I think hopefully by moving between these two states, there's an element of criticality that allows you to analyze not just the culture, but also your own experience within it. Again, it's nice to repeat this bit because it was so important. You must always have someone lower than yourself. And I think even though this is a role play environment, this rule, I think you'll find present in your life in lots of different places, often in like work environments, in media environments. Like the will to dominate is terrifyingly prevalent. So perhaps that's something else to think about. Again, I mentioned this thing about their idea about there being one set point, which was this murder-suicide in the middle. Before that, the environment is constructed up of rules, or I should say like protocol. So these are a bunch of things that characters can do to other people in that environment. And yeah, there's this saying in LARP, which is reality is just bad LARP design, meaning that we live in a reality and the rules are essentially arbitrary. They could be different. The way that you communicate to people, the way you inhabit your relationships with your loved ones, with your family, with the people on the street are constructed over many thousands of years, and they seem naturalized to us. They seem normal, but they're not. They are really something that could be different. And that's a really exciting and important aspect to, I think, role play. And that has within it the seeds of it, how it can be a political thing, how it can change and test out alternative patterns of behavior. Anyway, the main point is that the first stage was a bunch of rules. And so these varied greatly. There's quite simple stuff, like I could challenge you to a fight and we would go into one room and there would be basic wrestling, no punching to the face, but there would be wrestling. Another simple game was there was one stick that existed within the environment. And this stick, if you had this stick, you were the worst. Like it was symbolically dog shit. And so, but you wouldn't be able to force somebody to take it. You had to trick them. So this thing was constantly being like moved around the group annoyingly. And once you had it, it was very difficult to get rid of. And just something as simple as that is oddly effective. Another positive thing, rule that I quite liked was, if you like somebody and you wanted to support them, mimic their behavior. Repeat what they say. So like when you saw this David example, when he was fighting against this hypothetical father, other people got behind him and repeated his words, which suddenly made him more powerful, allowed him to inhabit the space, allowed him to push back, and made him feel strong or her feel strong. And then if you're against that, if you're in an argument with somebody and suddenly everybody else is mimicking their body behavior and shouting at you back, then that's also quite like a hard place to be. I should also say with the rules that we workshopped a lot before. So this whole thing is premised on trust. Like I trusted somebody to waterboard me because I knew that I was communicating them in some way that I was okay. They knew that I was okay to a certain point. And, the level of trust to go that far is kind of profound. I should also say that one of the things I left out of the why is that I think the reason for doing this is also hyper-personal, that it is a chance, or I felt like for me, a chance to confront things that had happened in my life, and like things that I normally associate with school, of being dominated, of being like, I don't know, being in a hard place, of not being able to perform in certain things. I just wanted to put that in there because I think that is at the core of it. Okay, and then what do we have here? It's a very intense, immersive play. Most LARP is not this intense. Like this is maybe one of the more extreme LARPs that's been made. Oh yeah, so that's interesting. So we had this liminal play. So we had certain dolls and characters within the space. We had this white suit that you see in the top right of this slide. And you could enter that suit, or you could pick up one of these dolls and you could start becoming a character either for yourself or for another person. So there's a sex doll, for instance, which often people ended up role-playing relationships with women. And somebody might be doing that, and then another person might come along and take control of that doll and suddenly the doll is no longer in your control. Suddenly the doll is talking back and is being some other voice, some capacity for tension is developed at that point. So it was a really weird space and almost dreamlike at some points. Yeah. And then I mentioned the workshopping before and trust. I mentioned this liminal play. The characters, so I mentioned that the people playing it came from these various different places. And actually, I forgot one of them, which is quite nice. This one character, Matt, was a dominatrix in their real lives. And the dominatrix brought a lot of games. One of the most brutal mechanics is called Tickle and Punch. So you pin someone down and you give them the option, do you want to be tickled or do you want to be punched? Obviously, most people go for tickling, but you can only go for tickling for so long before you start begging for it to be punched. And then you can only be punched for so long before you start begging to be tickled. It's really quite horrible, but apparently very popular in the dominatrix scene. Anyhow, so yeah, we created characters through workshopping and through hot seating, this system of improvisation where I would say, so can you tell me about an experience you had at school today? And then we start developing memories for the character, both positive and negative. And we do these workshops where we would put a positive and negative memory inside of your body. So when you had a moment where you were not too sure what to do, you could channel back into that part of your body and kind of activate either a negative or positive memory, and also a direction. So what is that? A positive memory might actually lead to an angry action and vice versa. So again, it's trying to create a bodily understanding of this conceptual stuff. Like always always trying to bring it back to the body, because I think, you know, you can conceptually understand something, but to really know it, to contain it as knowledge, it has to be channeled through the body. Okay, safety, super important. I mentioned that we brought a lot from LARP. Safety is, without safety, you can't have the trust, and without trust, it doesn't work. So we brought mechanics in which were cut and break. If anyone said break, it means that things are too intense for them and everyone needs to back off a bit. So things don't stop, but they continue in a different way, and that person gets given a chance to breathe. Cut, everything stops immediately. The OK symbol, which has been made famous by alt-right trolls, is I'm okay. So for instance, when I was being waterboarded, I kept my hand in the OK symbol pose all the time so that people knew that I was okay. And that's really important, because the people who get traumatized are not the people who are having the thing done to them in these kinds of situations. It's the people doing the thing, because they feel like they've done something horrific. And so if they know, if they're communicating on one level that you're okay, that's amazing, and that gets around that. You're responsible for yourself. That goes back to communication. You have to communicate with others. If you do not, that's your bad. And that also means you can't blame someone else for something bad that happens to you, unless obviously it is actually their fault. But that worked very well. Everything was tested. And then we also had like a no play zone, which you could go for like a breather. In the thing, but we also, just to highlight, we had 2 women in there playing men, and that brought a very interesting energy, and also kind of was fascinating to see that it had nothing to do with genitals you have that allowed you to perform like a absolute sound of like a cunt. Like it really, one of the women, the dominatrix, actually, she pushed somebody from the 2nd tier down to the 3rd tier and dominated the hell out of everybody. She also was she was a semi-professional wrestler, which I think helped her a lot. Documentation. We have body cam. So how do you capture an essentially subjective, hugely subjective experience? We put body cameras on every participant, and there's CCTV throughout the whole installation, which gave me 44 days of footage, which is a painful amount of footage to edit. Let me just tell you, painful. But it allowed for every moment to be seen, and that was wild. Like, obviously I had my one experience of what it was like, but there were 9 other experiences, and then there were these weird objective angles. So looking back over the footage, suddenly you realize that what you thought was happening, what you thought was reality, was just quite simply not the case. So that was great. It was important that it was integrated into play, so that it wasn't, and so there's this fiction sort of gets created around why CTV, which is to create a media package, a legacy. So these people have this mission, which is this murder-suicide, and they don't want that to be a wasted statement. They want that to be communicated to the media. And what's really terrifying about this work is during the opening happened 6 days before the Christchurch shooter in New Zealand. And he used the exact same cameras that we used within the production of this. So he created this media package, which obviously went viral and spread like crazy. So his mission was complete. And it was just a coincidence that that was the same thinking that was used within this work. So again, terrifying and kind of symmetries. And it made the private view, so it was one of the weirdest experiences I think I've ever had. And then, editing process, painful. This is a climactic moment where one of the characters, played by this guy Kwame, has a sort of breakdown or a cathartic moment and is supported by the group. You can also see these lasers on his face. And so each body camera has a laser. So you become very aware where everybody is pointing. You can also use your laser to sort of psych people out by pushing it into their eyes, or you can show support to them. In this instance, it's, even though it looks quite aggressive, it's about support. So everybody in the room started focusing their gaze towards this one person. Blah, 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 responsibility represent, and then responsibility representation to the participants, to the people, I don't know, that we're representing, even though there is this kind of inclination to push them away and to judge them. And then this other really pressing thing is like, how do you not glamorize this culture? And how do you create like a serious conversation around it? And so that ended up going into events that happened during the screening of this. There were panel discussions about radicalization. We had a lot of a discussion about masculinity and bringing different types of people into the room, from queer theorists to people who work, I don't know, with men in places like prisons and things. And then casting. And then this is about some experiences that some of the people had, including the David character that you saw. But I think I might just now shift quickly to just going to show you 2 minutes of something. And then we'll open up to conversations. Vanessa Carlos, lovely to see you. Hold on. Oh, okay, one second, I have to shut some stuff down. Can you guys see a guy's portrait? Okay.
And then having that stripped away, I kind of felt like I wasn't a character anymore. Not a character anymore, I was still a character, but I felt I didn't have a purpose.
In fact, this sounds really bad, but as soon as you were demoted, I saw you as nothing. Like, Matt was a tier 4 and I still respected them. I was like, even when you were in the room, I was just like, you're not even worth looking at, you're just, yeah.
I felt the way that you saw me. I felt like I was nothing in the room. I felt like I couldn't look at people, and I felt like I couldn't make decisions on my own, you know, and that was really, really tough, to kind of feel like you don't belong anywhere. You kind of had all the carpet ripped underneath, and there's not even a floor underneath the carpet. You just keep falling, and you just kind of don't know when it's going to stop.
Most of all, I have this sadness that feels really present. I don't think David didn't realize what was going to happen until the very, very last moment, and was not okay with the shooting at all. So when it happened, and I started crying, and one of the thoughts going up was, "Oh, you're so fucking weak. What the fuck you doing? You like that I didn't take it right, being shot." And coming out of it, I just kept on, and I like when we woke up, kept on crying, and felt so embarrassed by that, and having a hard time facing others, and it felt like a real sense of shock. After the shooting. Sorry, I'm fine. It's just reactions.
I didn't know what to do. I couldn't handle myself last night.
Okay, yeah. God, that actually made me want to cry. Yeah, so I suppose questions?
Hey, well, thanks so much. That was very intense. Yeah, and thank you for such an incredible insight into Cell. It was so great to sort of go through it all and to sort of understand the whole construction of it and experience of it. I think it's fascinating that you bring up, well, there's so many aspects to it, like that sense of security of being in a group, of being part of a group and a social order, even within the context of that violence, and then the vulnerability of these groups. And I mean, on the one hand, is sort of, it seems, yes, this investigation from the inside into sort of toxic masculinity, but also is it sort of, I've got a few questions actually, but also sort of, is it also a metaphor of kind of society as a whole, in this kind of although it's exaggerated, it's like actually prevalent, sort of prevalent throughout.
Yeah, I think that's really fundamental, like how this stuff is really present around us. And I was saying how for me it was like confronting my own past, like, and actually, so before this I couldn't cry, and now now I can cry, but I kind of want to now, which is annoying. But yeah, and I know, creating space for vulnerability, because it's not, as you said, it is broadly not present. I mean, the idea of what it is to be a father is really interesting. It doesn't have much space to emote. It does not give, there's no responsibility that says that this emotional register needs to be present. So often it's not. And I think when that, it's not that men don't feel emotions, or rather it is because men do not feel emotions after a while because they're told that they shouldn't be feeling emotions, or not given the language to do so. I mean, it's also some women as well, and some men are great at feeling emotions, so it's not a completely universal truth. But you know, I've come from an environment with two sisters, and they were brought up really differently to myself. I don't know, it's complicated.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, to use violence as this form of reflection and catharsis in your work. The idea of kind of unbuilding yourself, you can emerge, reflect upon yourself. And so I guess, another sort of question is whether you see this almost, well, first of all, whether there is a necessary violence in self-betterment, and secondly, whether you see this as an optimistic work as a result of that.
I don't know about violence, but I think there is a need for confrontation of yourself, and I think that is really vital. And I know on a level, this work is selfish in that, like, I needed to confront some things in myself, and I use this as a vehicle to do that. And it is a very disruptive process, almost necessarily. And it's, I don't know, like, I wish there are more spaces that like allowed for that kind of thing.
Yeah, okay, well, I will wait for, please raise your hands, ask questions now. I just got one other question before we'll wait for questions, which is, I guess, how does this work fit into your broader context of other works? Because we've focused on this one. I just wonder, has this theme kind of, would you say it's sort of always been there, or it's a new direction, and how does it move forwards? Where does it fit sort of within the bigger?
Yeah, so for many years ago, I started doing role play without, I don't know, that to me, the most important thing is to look about how identity is formed and the pressures that constitute one's identity, like both broadly and personally, and to use role play to investigate that. And like before, I was doing it in a much broader way, and kind of just simply with that vague political idea that, like, you know, you could be other than you are. The systems we inhabit could be other than they are. And by like playing and performing other versions of yourself, you become a little bit more aware, you have a little bit more agency in that process. But I think this, for me, is like a really deeply personal work. And through the mechanics and through the process that was developed, it just feels much fuller, for want of a better term, or more, I'm really interested in this parallel between the individual's experience and the political, and how they can't be divided. And I think that people doing the work is an important political gesture.
Yeah, okay. So Lily, shall I unmute you? Okay, Lily, are you there?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great.
Hi.
Thanks. I was trying to raise my hand, but I couldn't. I'm not sure if people are able to raise their hands for questions. I wasn't able to. So maybe we'll just have to wave frantically at the camera if anyone wants to ask anything. I was reminded a bit of this paper I read when I was at university by Susan Buck Morris about the aesthetics of fascism in propaganda videos, and how important I've just forgotten her name, the Nazi propagandist lady, how her imagery, like people seeing themselves in a crowd, and her ability to capture that with a kind of exquisite beauty of the body, this noble force. Like what an important mechanism that was for kind of seeing oneself back again. And I was wondering how this like, I don't know, something like 4chan is like a capacity to see oneself in a different way that is like as the internet. I mean, maybe I don't know if it's really a question, but I guess I was just thinking that it allows this kind of performance of a self in many ways.
Yeah.
And if this is a way to, it's kind of I want to kind of participate in this. I have to say, just like listening to you, it sounds like such a transformative experience to go through that process. But how much could we, I don't know, I guess as a kind of antidote to the kind of aesthetic, a different kind of aesthetics. I don't know. It's not really a question, but maybe.
So your statement is about the aesthetics of that culture and how it allows people to situate themselves within something.
Yeah.
I think that what's interesting is that those boards offer you like a place to go, and they offer you an aesthetic to not only, I suppose, to project yourself into, but also to begin puppeting yourself. And what's interesting is, I think, I'm not too sure if this is answering your point, but like if you immerse yourself within those online environments, it becomes very soon that you're not only given a place, but the memes start puppeting you. They like give you, they tell you almost what to say, because there's only a certain amount of things that are acceptable within that discourse, like any discourse. And so you end up, if you spend enough time in them, the words just come out of your mouth. It's like a sponge, it's osmosis or something. And the imagery is designed to facilitate that. It's designed to like be attractive and edgy, and like 16-year-old boy be like, yes, this is hilarious, and I don't mind using the N-word now, and yes, this like gives me a great, it's really peculiar, which is perhaps a parallel to the fascist photographer. I don't know.
Yeah.
Oh, we have some messages, okay. I'm just sorry. Getting you, is a manager, are you there? Can you unmute people? Sorry, Lily. Okay.
Look, I mean, while you're doing that, I'm just another kind of I'm really dark. I didn't realize my light is sorry, but it's not for dramatic effect. It just happened to be like that. I was wondering about the experience. I've also the experience of being shouted at so much. I mean, all the video that you showed there was like the violence enacted when you're in a state of intensity, right, all the time, like in this kind of heightened fight and flight mode together. And then the kind of coming down from that. I just wondered how much the kind of acoustics and the environment, the kind of atmospherics of that also kind of white environment is very abstracting from yourself. I guess the first point I was trying to think of, like how to talk about the aesthetics of your piece as well, because it is quite clinical in some ways. I mean, there's something about the look of that room that is like blank slate and almost medical. I don't know. Yeah.
Go back. What was the first point?
The first point was about being shouted at and that kind of fight and flight terror mode that it seems like you're almost in that all the time. This kind of,
it's really exhausting, and it's also like pumps you up. It gives you this energy, that this adrenaline rush constantly, which is really attractive but also horrific after a while. And then because I did this thing called playing to bottom, because essentially on one level I was the architect of the experience. I was like, okay, well, I have to be at the bottom. And so I put myself in really awkward situations all the time. And it meant that after a while, people would choose me to begin to fight. And because I was exhausted, it was easier to beat me. And then the more exhausted I got, the more people wanted to beat me. And and then to your point about the intensity, then that there's definitely like a snapping point where you just can't, in your brain just like clicks and like, well, fuck you. And you go inside yourself.
Okay, I think maybe Vanessa had a question.
Carlos.
Yeah. I just always think about in your work, you've used, even before you had a word for role play, you used role play or immersion of yourself, of participants. And I'm always curious about what the line is where that becomes a way of enabling the participant or you to fully empathize with being someone else. But also at the same time, I feel like it mediates your own experience. It's almost like protects you from experiencing something fully, or protects the audience, but then it's also enabling. So how do you see that tension?
Well, me and my therapist talk about this a lot. And I mean, it enables, putting a mask on allows you to say and do things you would otherwise never do. But because you define it as a mask, it is somehow, as you mentioned, somehow separate from yourself. But then also when you get really into this, you're like, well, even when I think that I'm not having my mask, I still have a mask on. And therefore, like, separation becomes like baked into a lot of the way you live your life. And that is something that I'm wary of. I think that on one level, it's really liberating and has allowed me to get to know myself through putting on these masks. And at the same time, I worry that, like, oh, am I inhabiting this fantasy space? What is actually real? And I think, again, it just requires a conversation constantly about each instance.
Does it fundamentally allow you to get to know yourself or get to know someone else?
Yeah, I mean, it's weird because if you get to know somebody through role play, you can get to know a side of somebody that they would never normally represent or perform, which is wild and fascinating. And then you get to know this person, their day-to-day person. That's another kind of getting to know them. So yeah, it really can facilitate different modes of relationship. And some of the deepest relationships I've had have had an aspect of role play.
And could you talk more about the rules or the kind of, the script side of things? I mean, you've selected a kind of set of rules. I mean, did you just add everything in, or how did you kind of select what those rules are, and did it work? Did people really follow them?
Yeah, so Nina and I we workshopped the rules before, and we came up, the script is a list of maybe 100 different things that you could do at any one point. And some were more successful than others. Some, like the stick thing that I mentioned, was like this thing that we're like, okay, I'll just put that in and see what happens. And then it becomes a major part of the experience. And some just never get used. some I really wish I could use in my day-to-day life. Like there's one rule where if you walk behind somebody and put your hands behind their eyes, you can say what you're really thinking, and the person's not allowed to react to it. They just have to sort of take that knowledge, accept it, and then you just keep going on. I really wish I could do that in my real life. But yeah, so there's this wild list, and then you have to workshop it, and you think something's going to work. You hope something's going to work, and as I said, sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't.
Okay, Barb, you have a question? Hello?
Hi, Jess. Yeah, my question is, where did you come up with all the ideas for this? I mean, what, did you actually go to 4chan, and what was your experience with radicalizing groups prior to coming up with your 100 points? And were you actually subjected to these things yourself in another venue before you role played with these other people?
Yeah, so in terms of the general culture of 4chan and the alt-right, 4chan is a space that I have occupied on and off when I was younger, mainly as like a voyeur, and when it was a left-wing space. But I felt some kind of connection to some of the people on there, at least. And then one of my closest friends is a researcher into radicalization, and specifically looking at those forums and how they can be a pipeline to certain kinds of radicalized right-wing viewpoints. And so really the seed of it began in a conversation with him, and him just being very aware of what was happening in around 2016, I suppose, or maybe 2015. And then, I think the whole thing, again, is talking to a personal experience, not from my experience necessarily on 4chan, but perhaps growing up, feeling alone and dejected and in search of something, and realizing how attractive the culture on offer could potentially be to somebody in that state. And then more generally, again, another personal aspect where I've been in a relationship. I've been back-to-back relationships for 14 years, and one ended very badly. And I realized that my inability to communicate, not only to the other person, but to acknowledge the things that were going on inside myself, had become a problem and were hurting this other person and myself. And so that becomes the trigger for why I wanted to make it.
My wife and I met through a group experience similar to this, although it was not radicalized at all. And it was my second experience in a group kind of training. And the first one, after it was over, the group and the language felt too cultish for me to continue with relationships with any of the people. But the second group where we met provided us some really good lessons for communicating with one another. And but one of the exercises, the only thing that was like violence was using a padded bat to whack on the floor, the walls, or whatever during incredible frustration. And there were people who raised blisters on their hands as they battled with old demons that way. So the concept of something like this is, I'm familiar with it, and it's comfortable in that sense. But the kind of violence that you're describing, I think I'd be out of that room in a second.
Well,
but
I think for 2 weeks and be great. You'd really love it.
Say that again.
It is oddly shocking from an outside perspective.
Yeah.
But honestly, there's a process that gets you to a point where that is okay. And it's interesting you mentioned cults as well, because I think there's something very similar going on with the way that a cult brings somebody to a point and the operator.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, this is, it's fascinating, you know, because our experience was very benign and beneficial to both of us. And there's still aspects of it we continue to use after over 20 years as part of our communication. It was a basis for our initial conversations. So I can see where the group experience is, you know, it brought each of us to a greater understanding of ourselves, but never pushed the kind of boundaries you're talking about, like the waterboarding and engaging in violence and put downs and lowering people to different tiers.
That's not necessary. I don't think that stuff is necessary. I think, but there is something about a group experience that is, this is just necessary, I think, to deal with these things that I was dealing with. But I think a group experience can unlock so many things. And I think, again, going back to the body and the physicality of those experiences is really fundamentally important.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. Eden, Eden, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, hi. Thank you for your presentation. That was really fascinating. I kind of have two questions. Kind of one of them's already been touched on slightly. Kind of about when you were kind of creating these, like the personas that you were then going to embody in this performance. You said earlier on in your presentation that some of them were purely off like what you had read like on 4chan or something like that. It wasn't like an actual person that exists. But I was thinking about the idea of, especially on like 4chan where it's all anonymous, how do you create like a persona out of only like a very one-dimensional, like opinionated thing, unless I've misinterpreted something, I don't know.
No, well, I think with all of the processes, you start from the surface and then you get deeper. So, you know, some of the characters' initial premises were based on memes, which obviously is an incredibly flat place to start. And then other one, which could just be simply a statement that like, oh, they are the victim, for instance. Another one might be researching a high school shooter and like what they did prior to the shooting and what was their life like. But again, it's still quite surface because you don't really know that stuff. You can just, there's a lot of projection going on. And it's through hot seating that you can create a lot of depth. You start creating these memories for your character that in some way feel embodied. And then a lot of people bring their own stuff to it, which is also really interesting and sometimes difficult. You know, when you say, okay, I'm gonna hot seat you. I'm going to hot seat you and I want you to play somebody who's being victimized a lot at school, who finds it very hard to perform socially. Often one cannot help but bring their own experiences to the table or their own understanding of what that might look like. And so that's another point where reality and these constructs begin to overlap.
Great, thanks. I had one other question. I was thinking about when you were saying you put yourself in like the lowest tier, but then you were also saying that someone always had to be lower than you. How do you, like, how did that, if you were at the bottom, how did you have that mindset of there always has to be someone lower than you?
I was on the third tier. And I was still struggling to stay up. I was just willing to do things. And actually I even got promoted for one moment. And that was awful. Like I didn't have the respect to command my promotion. So people attacked me even more. And so I was still struggling within the hierarchy system and even being a little bit successful, but because I was doing it in a way that wasn't very smart, my character was very, not dumb, but just a bit of a jarhead. You know, they were just doing exactly what the boss said and not forming any alliances, willing to like walk into the firing line all the time. And there's one point where I literally did just switch off. I was like, fuck you guys, I'm going into myself. And that was a lot effective to cope with the stresses of the environment.
Great. Thank you.
Hey, do we have any final questions before we wrap up? Just looking for any raised hands.
Good.
No.
Well, thank you guys for having me.
Well, thank you so much. That was such an amazing experience, seeing Al and hearing it, you describe it. So, yeah, I'm really moved, and I have a lot to think about as well. So, thank you. Really, really great. Now I'm going to unmute everyone, if I can, unmute all, and then we can all clap. So thank you. Can everyone? Yeah. No, me. Okay.
I've asked everyone to unmute.
Oh, you have to ask them. Sorry. Okay. Oh, did I do the wrong thing? Okay. Hey, thanks. Have a great evening, everyone. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.